Look at this. This is a single row of pole beans, maybe 12 feet long. And I pulled over 30 pounds of beans off it last summer. 30 pounds. My neighbors thought I was exaggerating until I started leaving paper bags full of them on their porches. I wasn't showing off. I literally could not eat them fast enough. The crisper drawer was full. The freezer was full. I was blanching and vacuum sealing bags of them and stacking them in the deep freeze like little green firewood, and still they kept coming. And the thing that gets me every time is that none of the three things I did to get that harvest cost me more than a couple of dollars total. One of them was completely free. The reason most backyard gardeners never see yields like this is honestly kind of annoying. It is not because they are bad gardeners. It is not because they bought the wrong seeds or planted them at the wrong time or had a bad season of weather. It is because the absolute best advice, the stuff that actually works year after year, is too simple for anyone to make money selling it to you. Nobody is going to run a glossy ad campaign for a trench. Nobody is going to put wood ash in a shiny bag with a picture of a prize-winning bean on the front and charge you $18 for it. And so the information just sits there, known to a handful of old-timers and passed along quietly, while everyone else keeps buying the stuff that doesn't work and wondering why their harvest fills a salad bowl and not a wheelbarrow. I have been growing beans for a good 15 years now. And for the first 5 of those years, I was disappointed every single August. I would get enough for a few dinners, sure. A handful here, a handful there. Enough to feel like I had grown something, but not enough to feel like I had actually fed anyone. The plants always looked tired by midsummer. The leaves would yellow from the bottom up, that sickly pale green that tells you something is fundamentally not right. The beans would come in thin and tough, with that leathery skin and that string that runs down the seam and catches in your teeth. I tried everything the garden centers told me to try. More fertilizer, special bean blends in shiny bags with pictures of prize-winning pods on the front, the kind of bag that makes you feel hopeful just looking at it. Fancy inoculants that promise to double my yield, little black powders that you mix with water and coat the seeds in before planting. Liquid seaweed extracts, fish emulsion that made my whole backyard smell like a dock at low tide. And every year the same result. A handful of beans, a lot of frustration, and the creeping suspicion that I just did not have whatever magic touch the real gardeners had. Maybe my soil was wrong. Maybe my climate was wrong. Maybe I was just not cut out for this. Do you know that feeling? Standing in front of a trellis that should be dripping with pods, and instead you are squinting at a few sad, stringy beans that somehow got missed and are now the size of a pencil and about as tender. You know the ones I mean. The ones that hide under a leaf until they are too big and too tough to eat, and you pick them anyway out of some stubborn refusal to admit defeat, and then they sit in the fridge for a week because nobody actually wants to eat them. I know it all too well. I have stood in that exact spot, with the sun on my neck and the mosquitoes starting to find my ankles, looking at a trellis that was supposed to be a wall of green and instead looks like something that is already planning its own funeral. And I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another internet list of obvious tips you have already tried. More advice from someone who probably gardens in perfect soil in a perfect climate and doesn't understand what it's like to fight clay and drought and a 3-week heat wave in July. I completely understand your skepticism. I thought exactly the same thing until I saw with my own eyes what these 3 changes can do. Hand on heart, this is the stuff that finally turned my bean patch from a disappointment into something that bordered on a problem. A good problem, but a problem nonetheless. The kind of problem where you start avoiding eye contact with your neighbors because you have already given them beans 3 times this week, and you are running out of people who will take them. Let me just show you what I mean. The first tip is the one that changed everything, and it is also the one that sounds the most ridiculous when you first hear it. I want you to imagine you are a bean plant. Stay with me here. I know it sounds strange, but just do it for a moment. You have got a few weeks to grow from a seed into a productive vine. You push up through the soil, two little cotyledon leaves unfolding like a pair of hands opening to the sun. And then you have got a narrow window to flower and set pods before the heat of summer really hits, before the days get too long or too hot, and your biology tells you that the window is closing. Every ounce of energy you spend fighting off pests or repairing damaged leaves is energy you are not putting into flowers. And flowers, as you know, are the only thing standing between you and an actual bean. No flowers, no pods. It is that simple. So here is the question. What is the single biggest stressor for a young bean plant in the spring? It is not the cold. Beans can handle a chill better than most people think. I have had bean seedlings survive a light frost that wiped out my basil and my tomatoes without even flinching. It is not even the rain, though too much rain can rot the seeds before they germinate. It is the wind. Wind shakes young bean plants. It whips them back and forth. It tears their leaves, those big broad leaves that beans put out to catch sunlight. A torn leaf is not just cosmetic damage. It is a solar panel with a crack in it, producing less energy for the rest of its life. Wind forces the plant to spend all its energy building thicker, tougher stems just to survive instead of putting out those first delicate flowers. The plant is not thinking about reproduction. It is thinking about not getting snapped in half. It is hunkering down, reinforcing its structure, diverting resources away from the tender growing tips and into the main stem. And the standard advice you will hear is to put up a windbreak. A fence, a row of sunflowers, maybe some burlap on stakes. That works. I have done it. But it also shades your beans, and beans need full sun. They need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight a day to really produce, and preferably more. A windbreak that blocks the wind also blocks the light, and now you have traded one problem for another. The plant is protected from the wind, but it is starved for sun, and you end up with tall, spindly plants that stretch toward the light and produce a few sad pods at the very top. So what do? You get down on the ground. Literally. You change your perspective. The secret that an old gardener named Mrs. Kowalska finally shared with me after I had been complaining to her for 3 straight seasons was so simple I almost laughed. You do not build a windbreak. You grow your beans in a trench. Not a deep trench. Nothing dramatic. I am not talking about digging a ditch or anything that requires a shovel and a surveyor's level. I am talking about a shallow depression, maybe 4 inches deep and about a foot wide. You scrape it out with a hoe or even just your hands. You plant your beans at the bottom of it. That is the whole idea. The soil on either side of the trench shields the young seedlings from the wind that scours across the top of your garden beds. The wind hits the raised edge of the trench and skips right over the top, leaving the little plants in a pocket of still air. The plants grow up out of the trench, and by the time they are tall enough to catch the wind, their stems are thick and sturdy because they have not been fighting for their lives since day one. They have been able to put their energy into growing, not just surviving. The difference in stem thickness is visible. I have pulled plants from the trench and plants from a flat bed and held them side by side, and the trench plants have stems that are almost twice as thick at the base. They look like they belong to a completely different crop. The trench also does something else that nobody talks about. It catches water. When you water your beans, or when it rains, the water flows into that trench and soaks straight down to the roots instead of running off across the surface of your bed. If you have ever watered a flat garden bed and watched the water bead up and roll away, especially if your soil is a little dry or has a crust on top, you know exactly what I mean. A trench captures that water. It holds it in place long enough for it to sink in. Beans have shallow roots. They hate drying out. Their root systems are fine and fibrous, and they sit mostly in the top 6 inches of soil. A trench keeps the moisture exactly where they need it, exactly when they need it. It also makes watering more efficient. You can just run a hose or a watering can along the trench and know that the water is going exactly where it needs to go, not running off into the paths or evaporating from the surface of a flat bed. In a dry spring, that can be the difference between plants that thrive and plants that just hang on. Mrs. Kowalska told me she learned this from her grandmother, who grew beans in Poland in soil that was mostly sand. The kind of soil that drains so fast you can practically watch the water disappear. The trench was the only way to keep anything alive in a dry, windy spring. Her grandmother would dig these shallow furrows with a hoe, plant the beans in the bottom, and then just watch them go. And when I tried it for the first time, I could not believe the difference. I planted 2 rows of the same variety on the same day. One in a flat bed, one in a trench. Same soil, same sun, same water. The plants in the trench were darker green, stockier, and they started flowering a full week earlier than the ones in the flat bed. A full week. In bean time, a week of flowering in early summer is the difference between a modest harvest and the kind of harvest that makes you buy a second freezer. It is the difference between picking beans in July and picking beans in July and August and September. That extra week at the front end of the season cascades through the entire harvest. More flowers mean more pods. More pods mean more seeds developing, which means the plant keeps investing in reproduction. It is a virtuous cycle that starts with a 4-inch depression in the ground. I have done it every year since, and I will never go back. Now, that first tip will set your plants up for success. It gives them a strong start, a sturdy stem, and an early flowering window. But the second tip is the one that actually delivers the massive harvest. It is the one that takes a plant that is healthy and vigorous and turns it into a plant that is absolutely loaded with pods. And it is the one that most home gardeners have completely backwards. Let me ask you something. When you think about feeding your beans, what comes to mind? If you are like I was for years, you probably think about nitrogen. Beans are leafy green plants. Leaves need nitrogen. It makes sense. Every bag of fertilizer you have ever seen has 3 numbers on it, and the first one is nitrogen, and nitrogen is for green growth. And every garden center will happily sell you a high nitrogen fertilizer with a big N on the front of the bag. They will put pictures of lush green plants on the label. They will use words like vigorous and lush and explosive growth. Do not buy it. Do not use it. Walk right past that display. Using high nitrogen fertilizer on beans is like giving a marathon runner a dozen donuts right before the race. You will get a lot of lush, green growth. The plants will look amazing. They will climb to the top of your trellis and keep going, sending out tendrils and leaves and more leaves. Your garden will look like a jungle, and they will produce almost no beans. You will stand there in August, looking at a wall of green that is the envy of the neighborhood, and you will find maybe 3 pods hiding under all those leaves. Here is why. Beans are legumes. They have a special relationship with a type of bacteria called rhizobia that lives in the soil. These bacteria colonize the roots and form little nodules that you can actually see if you dig up a plant and look closely. Just pull up a plant, gently wash the roots off with a hose and look. They are pinkish and round, about the size of a pinhead, clustered along the roots like tiny pearls. And those nodules do something extraordinary. They pull nitrogen out of the air, out of the atmosphere that fills the spaces between soil particles, and convert it into a form the plant can use. Your beans are literally making their own nitrogen fertilizer, right at the roots, for free. It is a symbiotic relationship that evolved over millions of years. The plant feeds the bacteria with sugars from photosynthesis. The bacteria feed the plant with nitrogen. It is one of the most elegant partnerships in all of agriculture. When you dump a bunch of synthetic nitrogen on the soil, the plant gets lazy. It stops investing energy in those nodules because it does not need to. Why would it spend resources feeding bacteria when there is already plenty of nitrogen available? The bacteria die off. The nodules shrivel, and the plant, flush with easy nitrogen, focuses entirely on growing leaves and stems. It is in no hurry to reproduce. Reproduction in this case means flowers and pods. Why would a plant bother making seeds if it thinks it is living in an endless buffet of nutrients? It just keeps growing bigger, putting off flowering until some stress signal tells it to get serious. By the time that happens, the season is half over and the heat of summer is already starting to shut things down. So what do beans actually need? Two things, and neither of them is nitrogen. The first is phosphorus. Phosphorus is the element that drives flower and fruit production. It is the middle number on a fertilizer bag. It is involved in energy transfer within the plant, the formation of DNA and RNA, and the development of flowers and seeds. Without enough phosphorus, a plant can be green and healthy and still produce almost nothing. The second is potassium, which is the last number. Potassium helps with overall plant health, water regulation, and disease resistance. It strengthens cell walls, which makes the plant more resistant to pests and drought. It regulates the opening and closing of stomata, the tiny pores on the leaves that control gas exchange and water loss. A plant with enough potassium is a plant that can handle stress without shutting down production. But here is the thing about buying a bloom booster fertilizer from the store. Most of them are still too high in nitrogen for beans. Even the ones labeled for tomatoes or flowers often have an N number that is higher than your beans want. They are formulated for plants that do not make their own nitrogen, and they assume that you need to supply everything. Beans are different. They need a nudge in the phosphorus and potassium direction, and they need you to leave the nitrogen alone. The tip that transformed my harvest was this: plain wood ash. That is it. The stuff left over from a fire pit or a fireplace. The gray, powdery residue that you usually scoop out and throw away. Wood ash is roughly 0.13 as a fertilizer. 0 nitrogen, a little phosphorus, and a good amount of potassium. It is exactly the ratio that beans crave once they start flowering. And it is not just the NPK numbers. Wood ash also contains calcium, magnesium, and a whole range of trace minerals that got pulled up out of the ground by the trees the wood came from. A tree's roots go deep, sometimes dozens of feet deep, and they mine minerals from layers of soil that your garden vegetables can never reach. When you burn that wood, those minerals are concentrated in the ash. It is a slow-release, broad-spectrum mineral supplement for your soil. And it costs nothing if you already burn wood, or you can ask a neighbor who does. Most people who have fire pits or wood stoves are happy to give away their ash because they have to dispose of it anyway. I apply it exactly once, right when I see the first flowers starting to open. That is the critical moment. The plant is transitioning from vegetative growth to reproductive growth, and it needs a signal that says, yes, now is the time, put your energy into flowers and pods. I take a handful of ash, maybe a quarter cup per plant, and I sprinkle it in a ring around the base of the stem, a few inches out. Not right against the stem. You do not want to burn the plant or create a concentrated pocket of alkalinity right where the roots emerge. Give it a little distance. Then I water it in gently, just enough to settle the ash into the soil surface so it does not blow away. Do not dump it directly on the stem. Do not apply it on a windy day unless you want to look like a chimney sweep and spend the rest of the afternoon washing ash out of your hair. I learned that one the hard way. And do not use ash from charcoal briquettes or from burning anything that was painted, stained, or treated. Charcoal briquettes often contain chemical binders and lighter fluid residues that you do not want in your soil. Only clean, untreated wood. The potassium in that ash triggers a flowering response that is honestly kind of shocking the first time you see it. Within a week, the plants are covered in blossoms. White blossoms, purple blossoms depending on the variety, but just covered in them. And every blossom is a potential bean pod. Every single one. Now, there is a caution here that I have to mention. Wood ash raises soil pH. It is alkaline. If your soil is already very alkaline, you should not use it, or you should use it very sparingly. But most garden soils, especially in areas with a lot of rainfall, tend to be slightly acidic over time. Rain leaches calcium and magnesium out of the soil, and organic matter breaks down into acidic compounds. A light application of ash once a year during bean season is not going to ruin your soil. I have been doing it on the same beds for years, and my beans have never been better. If you are worried, you can get a cheap soil pH test kit for less than $10 and check before you apply. It is a good practice anyway, knowing what your soil pH is. But for the vast majority of backyard gardens, this is a safe, free, and incredibly effective way to push your bean plants into maximum production mode exactly when you want them to. The ash gives them the potassium they need to set fruit, and the phosphorus they need to develop those fruits into full, plump pods. And because it has no nitrogen, it does not trigger that lazy, leafy growth that ruins your harvest. The third tip is the one that nobody tells you because it sounds counterintuitive. It even sounds a little mean, like you are being cruel to your plants. But it is the secret to keeping the harvest coming for weeks instead of getting one big flush and then watching the plants give up. Here it is. You have to pick your beans constantly. And I mean constantly, every other day at minimum. Every single day if you can manage it. The moment a bean pod reaches a size you would want to eat, you pick it. You do not let it hang there looking pretty. You do not wait for a few more to join it so you can make a big harvest all at once on the weekend. You pick it now, today, this evening, even if it is just one bean. Even if it feels silly to go out there with a bowl and come back with 3 pods. You pick them. The reason is simple, and it goes back to the same biological imperative that makes nitrogen overfeeding a problem. An annual bean plant has one goal in its short life. Reproduce. Make seeds. Pass on its genetic material to the next generation. The pods you eat are the plant's way of packaging and protecting its seeds while they develop. The pod is a nursery. The beans inside are the babies. If you let a pod mature fully on the vine, the seeds inside will fill out and harden. They will go from tiny green nubs to full, plump beans with a tough seed coat. The plant will register that it has successfully completed its mission. It has made babies. It has ensured its genetic future. And it will start to shut down. Leaves will yellow from the bottom up. Flowering will slow or stop entirely. The plant has done its job, and it is ready to die. I have watched this happen in real time. You miss a few days of picking. You come back to find some pods that have gotten big and lumpy, and within a week the whole plant looks like it is giving up. But if you keep picking those pods young and tender, the plant never gets that signal. It keeps searching for its missing seeds. It keeps thinking, I have not succeeded yet. Something is eating my babies. I need to try again. So it keeps flowering. It keeps setting new pods. It keeps investing energy in reproduction because as far as it knows, it has not reproduced yet. The more you pick, the more it produces. It is a feedback loop that you can ride all the way until frost if you are diligent about it. I have had pole bean plants in late September. With the nights getting cold and the days getting short, that were still pumping out fresh, tender beans, while my neighbor's plants had been brown and crispy for a month. The only difference was that I was out there every evening with a bowl, picking anything that looked ready. My neighbors would do a big harvest once a week, and their plants would shut down. I would do a tiny harvest every day, and my plants would keep going. This also solves another problem that plagues bean growers. Tough, stringy beans. A bean that stays on the vine too long gets fibrous. The pod walls thicken and toughen to protect the developing seeds. The plant is reinforcing the nursery. The sugars start converting to starch, which is a more stable form of energy for the seed to use when it germinates. The texture goes from snap to chew, from crisp and juicy to leathery and dull. By picking young and picking often, you are not just extending the harvest window. You are also ensuring that every bean you bring into the kitchen is at its absolute peak of tenderness and flavor. There is no comparison between a bean picked 3 days ago that got woody on the vine and a bean picked this morning at the perfect stage. They are not even the same vegetable. The young one snaps clean when you bend it. It has a bright, almost sweet flavor. The old one bends without breaking and tastes like grass clippings. I know this sounds like a lot of work. Going out every day to check your beans. Adding another chore to a list that is already too long. But here is the thing. Once you get into the rhythm of it, it takes about 5 minutes. Beans are not subtle. They do not hide their pods underground like potatoes. They do not require you to dig around and guess whether they are ready. The pods are right there, hanging in front of your face, green against green, but easy to spot once you train your eyes. You walk down the row, you give the trellis a gentle scan, and you pick anything that is ready. You do not need tools. You do not need to bend over or kneel down. You just walk and pick, walk and pick. It is a pleasant evening ritual, a chance to be in the garden and see what else is happening while you are there. Maybe you notice that the tomatoes need water. Maybe you spot a cucumber that is ready. Maybe you just stand there for a minute and listen to the birds. And the payoff, in terms of total pounds harvested over a season, is enormous. I would estimate that consistent picking alone doubled my yield from the same number of plants. Not an exaggeration. The plants that got picked every day produced for at least 3 weeks longer than the ones I let go during my lazy years. 3 extra weeks of production is not a small thing. It is the difference between beans as a side dish and beans as a staple food. So let me put these 3 tips together for you, because they work as a system. They are not isolated tricks that you can pick and choose from. They reinforce each other. They build on each other. The trench gives your young plants a protected start, saving their energy for flowering instead of fighting the wind. It keeps them moist and sheltered, and lets them build the thick stems they need to support a heavy load of pods later on. The wood ash, applied at the first sign of flowers, gives them exactly the nutritional nudge they need to explode into bloom without the leafy, lazy growth that nitrogen causes. It supplies the phosphorus and potassium that drive flower and fruit development, and it adds trace minerals that support overall plant health. And the relentless picking keeps the plants in a state of productive desperation, pumping out new pods week after week, because they never get the signal that their work is done. They never get to make mature seeds, so they never stop trying. The trench sets the foundation. The ash triggers the explosion. The picking sustains it. The cost to implement all 3 of these is essentially zero. The trench is just a different way of shaping the soil you already have. You do not need to buy anything. You do not need to build anything. You just need to drag a hoe or a trowel through your bed before you plant. The wood ash is a waste product from your fireplace or fire pit. Something you were going to throw away, or maybe sprinkle on an icy sidewalk in the winter. And the picking is just your time, which you were going to spend harvesting anyway. You just do it more often. Instead of a big Saturday morning harvest session, You do a 5-minute evening walkthrough. The total time investment over a week is probably the same. It is just distributed differently. There is no special equipment to buy, no branded products, no subscription service, no proprietary blend of 17 secret ingredients developed in a laboratory. It is just knowledge. And that, I think, is why this kind of information does not get shared as widely as it should. There is no ad budget behind wood ash. No influencer is getting paid to tell you to dig a shallow trench. The gardening industry makes its money selling you bags of fertilizer and bottles of bloom booster and fancy trellis systems and inoculant powders and all the rest of it. They do not make money when you solve your problems with a handful of fireplace debris and a slight adjustment to your planting technique. In fact, they lose money. Every gardener who figures this out is a gardener who stops buying the stuff they are selling. But this is the kind of knowledge that real gardeners have always passed down. The old-timers who grow gardens that look like jungles and always seem to have more produce than they know what to do with. They are not doing anything magical. They are not blessed with some gift that you do not have. They are just doing a few simple things that work with the biology of the plant instead of fighting against it. They understand that a bean plant is not a machine that you feed inputs into and get outputs from. It is a living thing with its own priorities and its own evolutionary history. And once you understand the why behind each of these tips, you start to see your garden differently. You stop thinking about feeding plants and start thinking about managing their stress. You stop thinking about maximizing growth and start thinking about guiding energy toward the part you actually want to eat. It is a shift in perspective that changes everything. You become a collaborator with the plant instead of a commander. I remember the summer it all clicked for me. I was standing in my garden in late August. The sun was going down and the mosquitoes were just starting to come out, and I was holding a colander full of beans. A big stainless steel colander, the one I usually use for pasta, and it was heaped so high that beans were falling off the top when I walked. And I realized I had already filled the freezer and was now just giving them away. That had never happened before. In previous years, I had been protective of my bean harvest, carefully rationing it out for special dinners because there was never quite enough. I would plan meals around the beans. I would count the pods before I picked them and calculate how many I could spare. Now I was the guy leaving bags on porches. The guy whose garden other people slowed down to look at when they walked by. The guy who brought a grocery bag of beans to every barbecue and potluck and still had more at home. And the only thing I had changed were these 3 unglamorous, practically free practices that nobody was selling. A trench, a handful of ash, and the discipline to pick every single day. If you are planning your bean patch for this season, I want you to try this. Even if you are skeptical. Especially if you are skeptical. Skepticism is healthy. It means you have been burned before by advice that did not work. But this is not advice that someone made up to sell you something. This is advice that has been working for generations, passed down from grandmothers to granddaughters, from old gardeners to young ones. Dig a shallow trench instead of a flat bed. Save some clean wood ash from your next fire. And make a promise to yourself that you will pick your beans every single day once they start coming in, no exceptions. Do it for 1 season and see what happens. Hand on heart, I believe you will be shocked. You will have the kind of harvest that makes you feel like you finally cracked the code. You will stand in your garden in August with a colander that is too small for the job, and you will wonder why nobody told you this sooner. And you will have done it for less than the cost of a single coffee from a vending machine. The knowledge is old. It is simple. And it works. Now you have it. Share it with someone who is tired of staring at a sad, unproductive bean trellis and wondering what they are doing wrong. They are probably not doing anything wrong. They just have not been told the right things. Like this video if it helped you, and subscribe if you want more practical, tested garden advice that does not require a trip to the garden center and a $50 receipt. Now go dig a trench. Your beans will love you for it.